Welcome to HOA Karen Gets Denied. This is what selective enforcement looks like. You are going to respect this process. That is what Teresa Garcia yells at me from 3 feet away, waving a laminated policy sheet in my face like it is a warrant. I stand on my own driveway in Burlington, Vermont, holding a certified envelope I signed for 10 minutes ago, and I have no idea what case number she is talking about. The letter says I owe the Magnolia Heights Property Owners Association $900 in backdated fines for irrigation system violations that supposedly started 8 months ago. I work as a landscape irrigation tech, so I know my system is clean. I also know I never got a first notice. Teresa does not care. She slams the clipboard onto the hood of my truck and tells me the bylaws are old and therefore irrelevant when I try to cite the notice timeline. She says the current board voted to waive the grace period for repeat offenders, and my name is on the list. I ask her what repeat means if this is my first notice. She smiles and says, "Smile, I am documenting this for the file." She holds up a phone on a gimbal, filming from inches away, and I see the red recording dot. I take a breath. I stay calm. I know this game. Teresa is the welcome committee chair, which means she has no enforcement authority, but she acts like she does. She has been doing this for years. I moved here 6 months ago because the rent was cheap and the commute worked, and I have been hearing stories about Teresa ever since. Magnolia Heights is a development where the committee micromanages everything and calls it standards, and Teresa is the enforcer. She uses amenities lockouts as punishment and leverage, and she has a reputation for making people pay just to make her go away. I tell her I want to see the first notice. She says she does not need proof. She has paperwork and vibes. That line lands like a slap, and I see a neighbor across the street watering the lawn pause mid-spray to stare. Teresa does not lower her voice. She says the case is already in collections, and if I do not pay by Friday, the association will file a lien. I ask her what collections company, and she waves the question away like it is irrelevant. She says I need to take this seriously because the board is not playing anymore. I tell her I am not paying a fine for a violation I never knew about, and I am not doing it based on a letter that showed up today. She tells me the letter is courtesy, not requirement. She says the board sent the first notice months ago, and it is not her problem if I did not read it. I ask her to show me the proof of mailing. She says she does not have to. She says the bylaws allow the board to post notices electronically, and she does not owe me a receipt. I feel my chest tighten. I am trying to keep my credit clean, and the HOA is using fees like a weapon. I know if she files a lien, it goes on my record, and I cannot afford that. But I also know she is lying. I have been checking my email and the resident portal every week, and I have never seen a notice. I tell her I want access to the portal logs, and she laughs. She says the management company does not give out logs. She says I can file a records request, but it takes weeks, and my deadline is Friday. I do not answer. I just turn and walk inside. Teresa yells after me that ignoring the problem does not make it go away, and she is going to recommend immediate escalation. I close the door and lean against it, holding the envelope. The letter is printed on association letterhead, but the formatting is off. The case number does not match the style I have seen on other notices in the neighborhood. The signature is a scan, not a wet signature, and the date stamp says it was created yesterday, even though the violation period starts 8 months ago. I sit down at my kitchen table and open my laptop. I log into the resident portal and search for notices. There is nothing. I check my email spam folder. Nothing. I check my physical mailbox records because I keep photos of every piece of mail I get for work, and there is no first notice. I pull up the bylaws document I saved when I moved in, and I find the section on violations. It says the association must provide written notice within 30 days of discovery, and the resident has 15 days to respond before any fine is imposed. The letter I got today says the fine was imposed 6 months ago, which means the notice would have been sent 8 months ago. But I moved in 6 months ago. That is when I realized this is not about me. This is about someone else or something else, and I am just the latest target. I pull up the association website and click on the board meeting minutes archive. The minutes are posted as PDFs, and I start reading backwards. I go back 8 months, then 9, then 10. I am looking for any mention of irrigation violations, or any mention of my address, or any mention of enforcement policy changes. I find nothing, but I do find something else. 10 months ago, there is a gap. The minutes for that month are missing. The archive jumps from September to November, and October is just gone. I click on the November minutes, and I see a note at the top that says the October meeting was canceled due to lack of quorum. But the September minutes say the next meeting is scheduled for October 15th, and there is no mention of a cancellation. I screenshot everything. I keep digging. I go back further, looking for patterns. I find 3 more gaps over the last 2 years, always in the fall, always with a note about quorum or cancellation. I also find a thread in the minutes about a towing contract dispute. 2 years ago, the board voted to switch towing vendors after complaints about improper tows. The old vendor was called out by name, and the board president at the time said there were multiple incidents of vehicles being towed without proper notice. The new vendor was approved, and the old contract was terminated. But 6 months later, the old vendor is back. There is no explanation in the minutes. There is no new vote. The vendor just reappears in a list of approved service providers, and nobody says a word. I feel my stomach drop. I screenshot the vendor section and cross-reference it with the current approved vendor list on the website. The old vendor is still listed. I pull up my certified letter again and check the fine breakdown. $300 is for the irrigation violation. $600 is for an administrative fee, payable to the management company. But the management company does not handle collections. They handle administration. If this fine is in collections, why is the fee going to management? I need help. I grab my phone and call my neighbor 2 doors down, a guy named Rick who has lived here for 5 years. He answers on the second ring, and I ask him if he has ever had a problem with Teresa. He laughs. He says everyone has had a problem with Teresa. He says she tried to fine him 2 years ago for parking a work truck in his driveway overnight, even though the bylaws allow it. He says he fought it, and the board eventually backed down, but Teresa made his life hell for months. She reported him for every tiny thing she could find, and she tried to get his amenity access revoked. He says the only reason he won is because he had a lawyer send a letter, and the board did not want the expense. I ask him if he remembers anything about a towing issue. He pauses. He says, yeah, actually, there was a big deal about that a couple years ago. He says a bunch of cars got towed from the guest lot, and the owners said they had guest passes, but the tow company said the passes were expired. The board said the tow company made a mistake, and they switched vendors. But then the same company came back later and nobody said anything. Rick says he thought it was weird, but he did not push it because it did not affect him. I thank him and hang up. I pull up the bylaws again and look for the section on vendor contracts. It says any contract over $5,000 requires a board vote and a recorded motion in the minutes. Towing contracts are definitely over $5,000. If the old vendor came back without a vote, that is a procedural violation. If Teresa is involved, and if she has been using the towing vendor to pressure people, that is worse. I need to see the old complaints. I file a records request online. I ask for all meeting minutes from the last 3 years, all vendor contracts, all enforcement case files, and all towing incident reports. I submit it through the portal and I get an auto reply that says requests are processed within 10 business days. My deadline is Friday. Today is Tuesday. I do not have 10 days. I call the management company. I get a voicemail. I leave a message explaining that I received a backdated fine with no prior notice, and I need the case file immediately. I say I am disputing the fine and I need to see the enforcement timeline. I hang up and I wait. 20 minutes later, I get a call back. The woman on the line says her name is Linda, and she is the compliance coordinator. She says she does not have my case file in front of her, but she can look it up. I give her my address and the case number. She puts me on hold. 3 minutes later, she comes back. She says the case was opened 8 months ago after a site inspection identified an irrigation leak. She says the first notice was mailed to my address on file. I tell her I did not live here 8 months ago. She pauses. She says the case is tied to the property, not the owner. I tell her I am a renter, and the landlord never forwarded anything. She says that is between me and the landlord, and the association is not responsible for tenant communication. I ask her to send me the case file. She says she will email it to me by end of business. I hang up, and I feel my pulse in my temples. I check my watch. I have a notary appointment booked for Thursday to submit a sworn statement for a separate work issue, and if I miss it, I am delayed for weeks. I cannot afford to spend the next 2 days fighting Teresa, but I also cannot let this fine stand. I open my email and I start drafting a formal dispute letter. I cite the bylaws section on notice, I attach my move-in date documentation, and I demand that the fine be voided. I also ask for a copy of the first notice, the site inspection report, and the enforcement timeline. I send it to Linda, and I CC the board president. I send the email and I sit back. My phone buzzes. It is a text from Teresa. It says, "You are making this harder than it needs to be. Pay the fine or face the consequences." I do not reply. I screenshot the text and I add it to my evidence folder. 2 hours later, I get the case file from Linda. I open the PDF and I start reading. The first notice is dated 8 months ago, and it is addressed to the property, not to a specific person. The notice says an inspection identified a leak in the irrigation system, and the property owner has 15 days to repair it or face a fine. The notice is signed by Teresa. I check the formatting. It matches the certified letter I got today, which means both documents were created using the same template. I zoom in on the signature. It is a scan, and the resolution is low. I run a reverse image search on the signature, and I get a hit. The same signature appears on a dozen other notices in the public meeting minutes archive, all from different months, all with the same low resolution. Teresa has been using a signature stamp or a saved image file to sign enforcement notices. I keep reading. The site inspection report is attached. It is one paragraph. It says the inspector observed water pooling near the property line, and the irrigation system was identified as the source. The inspector is listed as Teresa. There is no third-party verification. There is no photo. There is no follow-up. The report is dated the same day as the first notice, which means Teresa did the inspection and issued the notice on the same day, with no gap for the property owner to respond. I feel my jaw tighten. This is not an enforcement case. This is a setup. Teresa inspected the property, wrote the notice, signed it herself, and mailed it to an address she knew was vacant. When I moved in 6 months later, she waited, and then she sent the certified letter with a backdated fine and a fake case number. She is not enforcing the rules. She is creating violations out of thin air, and she is using the management company to collect the fees. I need more proof. I pull up the vendor contract list again, and I find the towing company. I Google the company name, and I find a Yelp page. The reviews are brutal. Multiple people say the company towed their cars without notice, and when they tried to get the cars back, the company demanded cash and refused to provide receipts. One review says the company works with HOAs to create fake violations and split the tow fees. The review is from 18 months ago, and it mentions Magnolia Heights by name. I screenshot the review. I pull up the board meeting minutes from 18 months ago, and I find the vendor contract discussion. The board voted to terminate the old towing vendor after multiple complaints. Teresa was not on the board at the time. She was just the welcome committee chair. But 6 months later, the vendor is back, and Teresa is the one signing the enforcement notices. I checked the current board roster. Teresa is not on the board now either. She is still just the welcome committee chair. But the board president is a guy named Ron, and Ron has been on the board for 4 years. If Teresa brought the old vendor back, Ron would have had to approve it. I pull up Ron's name in the meeting minutes archive. I find a pattern. Every time there is a vendor contract discussion, Ron abstains. Every time there is a towing incident discussion, Ron is absent. Every time there is a complaint about Teresa, Ron schedules the discussion for a meeting that gets canceled due to lack of quorum. Ron is not incompetent. Ron is complicit. I print the Yelp review and I walk outside. Teresa is still in the neighborhood. I see her 2 houses down, talking to another neighbor. I walk over. She sees me coming and she raises her phone. She says, "Smile. I am documenting this for the file." I stop 3 feet away and I hold up the printed review. I tell her I know about the towing company. I tell her I know the vendor was terminated and brought back without a vote. I tell her I know she has been signing fake inspection reports and mailing them to vacant properties. She lowers her phone. Her smile does not move. She says I do not know what I am talking about, and I need to stop harassing her. The neighbor she was talking to steps back. I see his eyes flick between us. Teresa turns to him and says, "See, this is what I deal with. Hostile residents who refuse to follow the rules." The neighbor does not respond. He just walks away. Teresa turns back to me and says I have until Friday, and after that she is recommending a lien and a tow. I tell her I am not paying, and I am filing a formal complaint with the board. She says the board does not care, and I am wasting my time. She walks away. I go back inside, and I email the board president. I attach the Yelp review, the meeting minutes showing the vendor termination and the unexplained return, and the fake inspection report Teresa signed. I say I am formally disputing the fine, and I am requesting an emergency board meeting to address the enforcement procedures. I send the email and I wait. 4 hours later, I get a reply. Ron says the board meets once a month, and the next meeting is 3 weeks away. He says I can submit a written statement, and the board will review it at the next meeting. He says enforcement actions are not subject to emergency review. I reply, and I say the fine deadline is Friday, which is 2 days away, and I cannot wait 3 weeks. I say if the board does not address this before Friday, I will file a complaint with the state attorney general, and I will copy the local news. I send the email, and I turn off my laptop. Wednesday morning, I get a call from Linda. She says the management company is putting my case on hold pending board review. She says I do not need to pay by Friday, and the deadline is extended until the board meets. I ask her if Teresa knows. She says she will notify Teresa today. I thank her and I hang up. I feel a tiny bit of relief, but I know this is not over. Teresa is not going to let this go, and Ron is not going to help me. I spend the rest of Wednesday gathering more evidence. I go back through the meeting minutes and I find every mention of Teresa. I find a dozen enforcement cases she handled, and half of them have the same pattern: fake inspections, no photos, backdated notices, and administrative fees that go straight to the management company. I also find a complaint from a resident named Paul, who said Teresa tried to fine him for a fence height violation, even though his fence was approved by the architectural committee. Paul said Teresa measured the fence herself and claimed it was 2 inches too tall, and when he had it remeasured by a licensed surveyor, the surveyor said it was compliant. Paul filed a formal complaint, and the board scheduled a hearing. The hearing was canceled due to lack of quorum. Paul paid the fine. I find Paul's address in the resident directory and I drive over. He answers the door and I introduce myself. I tell him I am fighting a fake fine from Teresa, and I saw his complaint in the minutes. He nods. He says Teresa is a nightmare and the board protects her. He says he paid the fine because he could not afford to fight it, and he did not want her to retaliate. I ask him if he kept any records. He says yeah. He has the surveyor report and the original approval letter from the architectural committee. He goes inside and he comes back with a folder. He hands it to me and he says, "Good luck. You are going to need it." I take the folder and I thank him. I drive home and I add Paul's documents to my evidence file. I now have proof that Teresa has been running fake enforcement cases for at least 2 years, and the board has been covering for her. I also have proof that the towing vendor is dirty, and the board brought them back without a vote. I have everything I need to take this to the board meeting, but I also know the board is not going to act. They are going to delay, deflect, and protect Teresa, because that is what they have been doing for years. I need a trump card. I need something that forces the board to act immediately, something they cannot ignore or delay. I go back to the meeting minutes and I look for the quorum gaps. I find 4 meetings over 2 years that were canceled due to lack of quorum. I cross-reference the canceled meetings with the board member attendance records. Every time a meeting is canceled, the same 3 board members are absent: Ron, Teresa's neighbor Janet, and a guy named Steve. I pull up the bylaws and I check the quorum requirement. The board has 7 members, and quorum is 4. If 3 members are absent, there is no quorum, and the meeting cannot proceed. I dig deeper. I pull up the proxy voting rules. The bylaws say board members can vote by proxy if they submit a written proxy form at least 24 hours before the meeting. I search the meeting minutes for any mention of proxy votes. I find 2. Both times Ron submitted a proxy vote, and both times the proxy was submitted by email the morning of the meeting, which violates the 24-hour rule. The proxy votes were counted anyway, and the motions passed. I screenshot everything. I pull up the October meeting minutes, the one that was canceled due to lack of quorum. I find the attendance record. Ron, Janet, and Steve were absent. No proxy votes were submitted. The meeting was canceled, and the minutes say the next meeting will be held in November. But I also find something else. The September minutes say the board scheduled a special session in October to vote on the towing vendor reinstatement. The special session never happened. There is no record of it in the October minutes, because the October meeting was canceled. But the towing vendor is listed as approved in the November minutes, even though there was no vote. That is my trump card. The towing vendor was reinstated without a vote, which means every tow they performed after that is invalid. If I can prove the vendor is operating without a valid contract, I can force the board to terminate them immediately, and I can force the management company to refund every tow fee collected since the reinstatement. I did not stop Teresa because I wanted her on record. I wanted her to keep pushing, keep threatening, keep using the fake vendor so I could gather enough proof to take down the whole system. I call the tow company. I get a dispatcher. I tell him I need to verify the contract status for Magnolia Heights. He puts me on hold. 2 minutes later, he comes back and he says the contract was renewed in November 2 years ago, and it is still active. I ask him if he has a copy of the board resolution approving the renewal. He says he does not need one because the management company handles that. I thank him and I hang up. I call the management company and I ask Linda for a copy of the towing contract. She says she will send it to me by end of business. Thursday morning, I get the contract. I open the PDF and I check the signature page. The contract is signed by Ron as board president, and the signature is dated November 15th, 2 years ago. I pull up the November meeting minutes and I check the date. The meeting was held on November 20th. Ron signed the contract 5 days before the board voted to approve it. I have them. I screenshot the contract signature and the meeting minutes. I write a formal complaint to the board, and I attach every piece of evidence I have: the fake inspection reports, the backdated notices, the Yelp review, the quorum gaps, the invalid proxy votes, and the pre-signed towing contract. I say the board has been operating in violation of its own bylaws for at least 2 years, and I am requesting an immediate audit of all enforcement actions and vendor contracts. I send the email to the board president, and I CC every board member, the management company, and the state attorney general's office. I hit send and I sit back. My phone buzzes. It is a text from Teresa. It says, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." I screenshot the text and I add it to the file. Friday morning, I get a certified letter. I sign for it and I open it. It is a violation notice that reads like a ransom note with a deadline that makes no sense. The notice says I am in violation of the landscaping standards for failure to maintain the irrigation system, and I have 72 hours to complete the repairs or face an immediate tow and lien. The notice is signed by Teresa, and it is dated today. I call Linda and I tell her I just got another fake notice. She says she does not know anything about it, and she will look into it. I tell her I already filed a complaint with the state, and if Teresa sends one more notice, I am going to file a harassment complaint with the police. 2 hours later, I get a call from Ron. He says the board reviewed my complaint and they are scheduling an emergency meeting for Monday. He says I can attend and present my evidence and the board will make a decision. I tell him the emergency meeting should have been scheduled last week and I am not waiting until Monday. I tell him I am going to the tow yard today and I am going to show them the contract gap and I am going to demand that they stop cooperating with the association. Ron says I am interfering with association business and I could face legal action. I tell him he signed a contract before the board approved it, and that is fraud. I hang up. I drive to the tow yard. The yard is a fenced lot on the edge of town and the office is a trailer with a hand-painted sign. I walk in and I ask for the manager. A guy comes out from the back and I tell him I need to talk about the Magnolia Heights contract. He says he does not discuss contracts with residents. I tell him the contract is invalid and I have proof. I pull out my folder and I show him the pre-signed signature and the meeting minutes. I tell him the board president signed the contract 5 days before the board voted and the vote never happened because the meeting was canceled. I tell him every tow the company performed under that contract is legally questionable, and if the association gets audited, he is going to be named in the complaint. He takes the folder and he looks through it. He does not say anything for a long time. Then he looks up and he says, "You are telling me Ron signed this before the vote?" I nod. He shakes his head and he says, "That son of a bitch." He hands the folder back and he says, "We are done with Magnolia Heights." I am not getting dragged into fraud. I thank him and I leave. I drive back to the neighborhood and I park in my driveway. Teresa is outside talking to another neighbor. She sees me and she walks over. She says, "You think you are so smart, but you just burned your last bridge." I tell her the tow company is done with the association and her enforcement scam is over. She says I do not know what I am talking about and the board is going to deal with me on Monday. I tell her the board is going to deal with her and I have enough proof to get her removed from every committee she is on. She raises her phone on the gimbal and she says, "Smile, I am documenting this for the file." I stay calm. I pull out my phone and I start recording her. She lowers her phone and she says, "You cannot record me without my permission." I tell her Vermont is a one-party consent state and I do not need her permission. She says I am harassing her and she is going to call the police. I tell her to go ahead because I have a harassment complaint ready to file and the police are going to want to see all the fake notices she has been sending. She does not call the police. She just turns and walks away. I watch her go and I see the neighbor she was talking to earlier give me a thumbs up. I nod and I go inside. Monday morning, I drive to the board meeting. The meeting is held at the community center, and when I walk in, the room is packed. I see Ron at the head table, along with 6 other board members. Teresa is sitting in the front row, and she has a stack of papers in front of her. I take a seat in the back, and I wait. Ron calls the meeting to order, and he says the board is convening an emergency session to address a resident complaint regarding enforcement procedures. He says I have 10 minutes to present my evidence, and then the board will deliberate. I stand up and I walk to the front. I hand Ron a copy of my evidence file, and I start talking. I tell the board about the fake inspection reports, the backdated notices, the invalid towing contract, the quorum gaps, and the pre-signed contract signature. I show them the meeting minutes, the Yelp review, and Paul's surveyor report. I tell them Teresa has been running a fake enforcement scam for at least 2 years, and the board has been covering for her by canceling meetings and allowing invalid proxy votes. Teresa stands up and she says I am lying, and I am just trying to avoid paying a legitimate fine. She says she has documentation proving every violation she cited, and the board should dismiss my complaint. Ron tells her to sit down. He looks at the evidence file, and he does not say anything for a long time. Then he looks up, and he says, "This is a very serious allegation. We need to review this with the association attorney before we make any decisions." I tell him the attorney can review it later, but the board needs to act now. I tell him the tow company has already terminated the contract, and if the board does not terminate Teresa's enforcement authority immediately, I am going to file a lawsuit for harassment and fraud. Ron looks at the other board members. They look at each other. Nobody says anything. Then one of the board members, a woman named Sandra, says, "I have a question." She looks at Ron and she says, "Did you sign the towing contract before the board approved it?" Ron does not answer. Sandra says, "Because if you did, that is a breach of fiduciary duty, and you need to resign." Ron says the contract was signed in good faith, and the board approved it at the next meeting. Sandra says the board did not approve it, because the October meeting was canceled and the November minutes do not show a vote. Ron says the vote was implied. Sandra says implied votes are not valid, and the contract is void. The room goes quiet. Teresa stands up again, and she says, "This is ridiculous. The board is letting one hostile resident derail years of enforcement work." Sandra tells her to sit down. Teresa does not sit. She says, "I am the welcome committee chair, and I have authority to enforce the bylaws." Sandra says, "You are not the board, and you do not have enforcement authority. You have been issuing fake notices and signing fake inspection reports, and the board is liable for every violation you committed." Teresa says, "You cannot prove that." I stand up and I say, "Yes, I can." I pull out my phone and I play a recording. It is Teresa from last week saying she does not need proof, she has paperwork and vibes. The room erupts. Half the residents start yelling at Teresa, and the other half start yelling at Ron. Ron bangs the gavel and he says the board is going into executive session and the meeting is adjourned. I walk out of the meeting room and I stand in the parking lot. 10 minutes later, Sandra comes out. She walks over to me and she says, "The board just voted to remove Teresa from all committees immediately, and we are issuing a formal censure. We are also terminating Ron as board president, and we are going to hire an independent auditor to review all enforcement actions from the last 3 years." She says the board is also going to refund every fine Teresa issued without a valid inspection report, and we are going to send a formal apology to every affected resident. I thank her. She says, "You did the right thing. A lot of people were afraid to stand up to Teresa, and you gave them a reason to speak up." I nod and I walk to my truck. If this story made you want to check your HOA bylaws right now, smash that like button and subscribe for more real-life neighborhood drama where the paper trail always wins. 2 days later, I get a certified letter from the management company. The letter says my fine has been voided and the association is refunding my $900 plus an additional $300 for filing fees to end the fight. The letter also says Teresa has been placed on a no-contact directive by management, and any further contact from her will be considered harassment. I save the letter in my evidence file, just in case. I also get a call from Paul. He says he heard about the meeting, and he wants to file a complaint to get his fence fine refunded. I tell him to contact Sandra, and I give him her email. He thanks me, and he says, "You are a legend." I laugh, and I hang up. The neighborhood is different now. Teresa is gone. Ron is gone. The board is cleaning house, and the new president is Sandra, who actually reads the bylaws and follows the procedures. The tow company is gone too, and the new vendor requires written authorization from the board before they tow anything. The enforcement process is transparent now, and residents can access the case files online without filing a records request. I run into Teresa once more, 3 weeks later. I am at a hardware store in town, and she is in the parking lot. She sees me, and she starts walking toward me. I stay where I am. She stops 10 feet away, and she says, "You ruined my reputation." I tell her she ruined her own reputation by lying and faking enforcement cases. She says I am going to regret this, and she is going to make sure everyone knows what I did. I tell her everyone already knows what she did, and if she keeps threatening me, I am going to file a restraining order. She does not say anything. She just turns and walks away. I watch her go, and I see a stranger in the parking lot stop and stare. The stranger shakes his head and keeps walking. I go home and I sit on my porch. I think about the last month, and I think about all the people Teresa bullied over the years. I think about Paul, and the surveyor report he paid for, and the fine he paid because he was afraid to fight. I think about the residents who did not show up to the meeting because they were afraid of retaliation. I think about the neighbors who told me to just pay the fine and move on, because fighting Teresa was not worth the stress. But it was worth it, because now Teresa is gone, and the board is accountable, and the enforcement process is fair. And every time I see a new resident move into the neighborhood, I know they are not going to get a fake notice, or a backdated fine, or a threat from a tow company that does not have a valid contract. They are going to get a fair process, and a transparent board, and a neighborhood that actually follows its own rules. I also know that if Teresa ever tries this again, she is not going to get away with it. Because now the residents know what to look for, and they know how to fight back. And they know that paper trails are stronger than vibes, and bylaws are stronger than badges, and transparency is stronger than intimidation. A few weeks later, I get a package in the mail. I do not recognize the sender, so I open it carefully. Inside, there is a thank you card from a resident named Karen, who says she was one of Teresa's victims 2 years ago. She says she paid a fine for a landscaping violation that was never verified, and she always felt like she was cheated. She says she filed a refund request after the board meeting, and she just got her money back. She thanks me for standing up to Teresa, and she says she wishes she had been brave enough to do it herself. I save the card in my evidence file, even though I do not need it anymore. I save it because it reminds me why I fought. I did not fight because I wanted revenge. I fought because I wanted justice, and I wanted accountability, and I wanted to make sure nobody else had to go through what I went through. And I won. Not because I had a lawyer, or because I had money, or because I had connections. I won because I had a paper trail, and I had patience, and I had the guts to stand up to a bully who thought she was untouchable. A few months later, the association holds its annual election. Sandra runs for president again, and she wins. The new board votes to adopt a transparency policy, and they publish all meeting minutes, vendor contracts, and enforcement case files online. They also vote to require third-party verification for all site inspections, and they ban committee chairs from signing enforcement notices without board approval. Teresa does not run for anything. She does not show up to the annual meeting. She does not file any complaints, or send any emails, or post anything in the neighborhood group chat. She is gone, and the neighborhood is better for it. I run into Rick one afternoon, and he tells me the neighborhood feels different now. He says people are not afraid to complain anymore, and the board actually listens. He says a few residents have filed complaints about legitimate issues, and the board has addressed them without retaliation. He says it feels like a real community now, instead of a dictatorship. I agree. I tell him I am glad I fought, and I am glad the board changed. He says, "You did not just fight for yourself. You fought for all of us." I nod, and I walk home. I sit on my porch and I look at the neighborhood. The street is quiet. A neighbor waves from across the street, and I wave back. A kid rides a bike past my house, and a dog barks in the distance. It is a normal day in a normal neighborhood, and I am grateful for it. Because I know that underneath the normal, there is a system that works now. A system that is fair and transparent and accountable. A system that does not let bullies win, and does not let liars hide, and does not let fraud go unchecked. And I know that if Teresa ever comes back, or if anyone like her ever tries to pull the same scam, the residents are ready. Because they know what to look for now. They know how to read the bylaws, how to file a records request, how to cross-reference meeting minutes, and how to spot a fake signature. They know how to build a paper trail, and they know how to fight back. And they know that sometimes, the best revenge is not revenge at all. It is justice. It is accountability. It is making sure that the rules apply to everyone, not just the people who cannot afford to fight. I think about Teresa one last time. I wonder if she learned anything, or if she is just angry that she got caught. I wonder if she is planning her next move, or if she is finally done. I do not know, and I do not care. Because Teresa is not my problem anymore. She is the board's problem, and the management company's problem, and the state attorney general's problem if she ever tries this again. I did my part. I reopened the cold case. I connected the clues. I caught the culprit. And I forced the system to change. And now, I am just a guy sitting on his porch, watching the neighborhood go by, knowing that the paper trail always wins. Keep your paper trail close, and I will see you next time.